Bonjour, Michael.
Bonjour.
Thank you for joining us on this channel.
Right.
We are so happy to have you. There are many questions which have been asked by French devotees of Sri Ramana Maharshi, a lot.
Right.
So I made a selection because we could spend a full day on that.
Yes.
I made a selection. The first question is all about surrender, because Sri Ramana is very well known for Atma-vichara, for introspection, for self-investigation, and so on. But he had also another message for people, which was all about surrender. So I would like you to speak a little bit about that.
Yes, it is not actually another message. It is the same message, expressed in different way. He often used to say, there are two ways. Either investigate yourself and know what you actually are, or surrender yourself. Though he presented it as two different methods, if we go deep into either of them, we find they are one and the same. So it's actually just one path. He made that very clear in the in Nāṉ Ār, in the text Who Am I, in the 13th paragraph, in the first sentence, he says he defines what is surrender. But in the main clause of the sentence, he says, Atmanishta paranai iripte tanei isiknuku alipadam. That means being as Atmanishta paran is giving oneself to God. Atmanishta paran means one who is firmly established as oneself. That implies as one actually is, as one's real nature. How to be firmly established as ourselves, he explains in an adverbial clause, which is the first clause of the sentence. In that clause, what he says is, giving not even the slightest room to the rising of any thought other than Atma-chintana. Atma-chintana literally means thought of oneself, but it implies self-attentiveness. In other words, we need to be so keenly self-attentive that we thereby give no room to the rising of any other thought. When we are so keenly self-attentive, ego will thereby subside, and we will remain as we actually are, and that is giving ourselves to God. So in this sentence, he makes it very clear that self-investigation and self-surrender are, that is, the way to surrender ourselves is to investigate ourselves. So we cannot truly understand the practice of self-investigation without understanding surrender, and we cannot understand surrender without understanding self-investigation, because they're two sides of the same coin. That is, to the extent to which we attend to ourselves, we are thereby subsiding, and that subsidence of ego is what is otherwise called surrender. The reason for this, he explained on many occasions, but it's most clearly explained in verse 25 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. What he says in verse 25 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, he describes ego as a formless phantom. The reason it's a formless phantom we can understand from the previous verse, in which he said, the body doesn't say I. The insentient body doesn't say I. What he means by the body doesn't say I, that's a metaphorical way of saying the body is not aware of itself as I. Sat-chit doesn't rise. Sat-chit means being awareness. That is our real nature, as our mere existence and awareness just is. It doesn't rise. But between these two, one thing called I rises as the extent of a body. And this is ego, chit-jada-granti, mind, bondage, jiva, and so on. What he means there is, when he says one thing called I rises in between, what he means by in between, that again is a metaphor for saying ego is neither the body which is insentient, and therefore isn't aware of itself as I, nor is it Sat-Chit, because though ego is aware, it rises, and Sat-Chit doesn't rise. So it borrows the it borrows the nature of the body and the nature of Sat-Chit and conflates the two together. That's why it's called Chit Jada Granti, the knot formed by the entanglement of Chit, which is awareness, with Jada. It means insentience. That's referring to the body. So that is why ego is a formless phantom. It's formless because it's got no form of its own. It's a phantom because it's got no substance of its own. It borrows its substance, namely its existence and its awareness, from Sat-Chit. It borrows its form from the body. So that is the context in which he wrote that. That is what he says in verse 24. He says that. In verse 25, he says how this formless phantom, what is the nature of this formless phantom? He says, grasping form, it comes into existence. Grasping form, it stands. Grasping and feeding on form, it flourishes, it grows abundantly. Leaving form, it grasps form. If sought, it takes flight. What this means is that since ego is formless, whatever forms it grasps are things other than itself. All phenomena are forms of one kind or another, both physical phenomena and mental phenomena. So everything, all objects, all phenomena are what Bhagavan refers to here as form. When we rise as ego, the first form we grasp is the form of a body, which we take to be ourself. Body here, when Bhagavan talks about body, he's not just talking about the physical body, because we never experience this physical body in isolation. We always experience, it's not a dead body, it's a living body that we experience as I, and it's a body that seems to be awake. So it's in addition to the physical form of the body, there's life, mind, intellect, and will. These five are called the five sheaths, and we experience them collectively as ourself. So the first form of ego grasp is this form of five sheaths called body. That is the person we take ourselves to be, in other words. Grasping form, it stands. That means ego endures by continuing to hold on to this person. Without identifying ourselves as a body, we cannot stand as ego. And then as soon as we experience a body as I, through the five senses of that body, we project a world. We can see this is what happens in dream. As soon as we start dreaming, we experience ourselves as a body, and through the five senses of the body, we perceive a world. Both the body and world are our own fabrication, our own projection. They don't actually exist, but they're projected. Bhagavan says this waking state is another dream. Exactly like the dreams we have at night. This is just another dream. This is all a creation, a fabrication of our own mind. So we first grasp the form of a body as I, and then through the five senses of that body, we project a world. We project a world of physical phenomena outside, and another world of mental phenomena inside. Inside and outside is how it appears from our perspective. Because we're limited to this body, our mental world seems to be inside this body, the physical world seems to be outside the body. That's how it seems to us to be. So by grasping form means holding, how does this formless phantom ego grasp form? By being aware of forms, by grasping them in its awareness. In other words, by attending to form. So by attending to anything other than ourselves, we rise, stand, and flourish as ego. And if we leave one form, we grasp another form. Such is the nature of ego. Then the most important sentence in that verse is when he says, if sought, it takes flight. If sought means if ego, again, sought is a is a metaphorical use, because we're not looking for something which is unknown. We always know I am. That ego is always clearly known to us. Who is aware of all these things? I am. That I that is aware of everything else, that is ego. So if thought means, it implies if we investigate. So if ego investigates itself, in other words, instead of attending to anything other than itself, if it tries to attend to itself alone, so instead of grasping form, it's trying to grasp itself. Since it can rise, stand, and flourish only by grasping form, as soon as it tries to grasp itself, it begins to subside and dissolve back into its source. That's why Bhagavan says in that sentence of Nāṉ Ār that I read, the means to surrender ourselves is to hold on to that self-attentiveness so firmly that we thereby give no room to the rising of any other thought. Because other thoughts can rise only when we attend to them. If we're attending to ourselves, only to ourselves, there's no room for other thoughts to arise. So surrender and self-investigation are one and the same path, essentially. However, the starting point of surrender usually begins with the bhakti marga. And often it begins in the early stages of bhakti marga, when we are taking God to be other than ourselves. We want to surrender ourselves to God. We want to give ourselves wholly to God. Because why? Because we love God. If you truly love someone, you want to give to them. When we love, we are not looking for what we can get from that person. If we want to get something from a person we love, it's not really love. We are there for some ulterior motive. So if we truly love God, we are not asking anything from God. We want to give ourselves to God, because we want nothing other than God himself. And what stands between us and God is only ourselves, as this ego. So we want to surrender ourselves to God. So that's how the surrender starts in the path of dualistic devotion. When we try and surrender ourselves to God, we find that is the first obstacle between us and God is our will. Whatever is happening God is all-knowing, all-loving, and all-powerful. Because he's all-knowing, nothing can happen without his knowledge. Because he's all-powerful, nothing can happen without his consent. And because he's all-loving, he won't allow anything to happen that is not good for us. So, in fact, we see God as other than ourselves, but he doesn't see us as other than himself. In his view, we are nothing other than himself. So he loves us as himself. So his love is infinite, unlimited, without any, that is beyond all limits, his love. So we are since everything that happens is happening by his will, we should be willing to accept whatever happens, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, we should be willing to accept it. But as ego, it's natural for us to have likes and dislikes, and those likes and dislikes give rise to desires and so on. So what is standing between us and God? The first obvious thing is our will. So surrender begins with trying to surrender our will to God. Thy will be done. As Bhagavan says in Śrī Aruṇācala Padigam verse 2, your will is my will. That itself is happiness to me. So we are trying to give up all our likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, and everything, except whatever you want for me, that is what is good for me. That is happiness for me. As we go deeper in this path of devotion, the idea that God is something other than ourselves begins to dissolve. Because if God is the infinite whole, how can we be anything other than God? If he alone exists, what is this I that rises as something separate? So as our devotion matures, we become to understand God is not another. He is our own self. What is shining in our heart as I, that is God. So then our devotion, instead of attending to God as something other than ourselves, our attention turns within, and we begin to meditate on God in our own heart, as ourself, as I. So this is how the devotion, the surrender gets deeper and deeper. Having come to this part of this understanding that God is what shines in our heart as I, our will is still there, obstructing us. That is, however much we try to surrender our will, we cannot completely give up our will. So long as we rise and stand as ego, it's inevitable. So long as we experience ourselves as something separate, we like those things that seem to be beneficial for us. We dislike those things which seem to be harmful for us. So we can reduce the strength of our likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, and so on, but we cannot give them up entirely so long as their root remains. The root of likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, fears, and so on is what? It's only this ego, because whose likes and dislikes are they? Whose desires and attachments are they? Their own egos. So in order for our surrender to become complete, in order to first completely surrender our will, we must be willing to surrender ourselves. And in order to surrender ourselves, we need to investigate ourselves. So in the early stages, surrender may seem to be a separate path from the path of self-investigation. The surrender can become complete only to the extent to which it merges in the path of self-investigation. So actually, Bhagavan taught only one path, not two paths, but he presented it in two different ways, because people approach it from different angles. People have different backgrounds, different samskaras, some people are from more devotional background, some people are from a more reasoning background. They want to understand, they want to know. So to suit people of different nature. But if we are truly following Bhagavan's path, they're one and the same, and both descriptions of the path are equally appealing. That is, Bhagavan often used to say, Bhakti is the mother of jnana. Without love, we will never be willing to surrender ourselves. And we cannot investigate ourselves without surrendering ourselves. The very turning of our attention towards ourselves brings about the subsidence of ego. So surrender there cannot be any self-investigation without surrender. To the extent to which we investigate ourselves, to that extent we are surrendering ourselves. In order to surrender ourselves, we will do so only if there's genuine love there.
Thank you, Michael.
Right.
I had another question from a follower, which was all about Atma-vichara.
Yes.
Saying, okay, you seem to say that Atma-vichara was not well understood by people. They thought it was some kind of a mantra that they have to repeat, who am I, who am I, who am I? But it's not at all the case. It's just the start of the journey or something like that. Can you elaborate a little bit on this?
Yes. That is, in many English books, it is written as if Bhagavan said, ask yourself, who am I? Bhagavan never said, ask yourself, who am I? He said, investigate, who am I? Sometimes he may have used words that could be interpreted as ask, but we should, even when those words could be interpreted as ask, it is, if at all he uses the word ask, it's in a metaphorical sense. Merely asking ourselves, who am I, who am I, who am I? That is a mental activity. If you're doing it in the mind, it's an activity of the mind. That is not self-investigation. Self-investigation, in order to investigate something, you need to attend to it. So in order to investigate ourselves, we need to focus our entire attention on ourselves. That is, we need to withdraw our attention from all other things by turning it back towards ourselves. We need to face ourselves alone. That is our aim. So when we're attending only to ourselves, there's no room for any thoughts such as who am I or to whom is this. If our attention is diverted away from ourselves towards other things, then Bhagavan said, investigate to whom those other things have appeared. Even there, he doesn't say ask to whom they've appeared, investigate whom they've appeared. Investigating to whom they've appeared means turning our attention away from those things back towards ourselves. So the practice of self-investigation is simply being self-attentive. To the extent to which we are attending to ourselves, to that extent we are investigating ourselves. This is a very simple practice, but it's also a very deep and subtle practice. So the reason people easily misunderstand it is because our minds are gross. We are used to thinking in gross terms about gross things, whereas the subtlest of all things is that fundamental awareness I am. So we are now trying to withdraw our mind from all these gross objects, thoughts, perceptions, and so on, back to that to which all these things appear. So at first, many people find it, because we are so accustomed to attending to objects, when we're asked to attend to the subject, the one to whom all objects appear, people say, I can't find the eye. As if there are two eyes, one eye looking for another eye. There is only one eye. That is, we are always self-aware. So being, that is, Atma-vichara simply means being attentively self-aware. Though we are always self-aware, because of our interest in other things, we generally not paying much attention to I, we're attending to other things. Even this body and mind, this person we take ourselves to be, this is not what we actually are. So even our concern about this person is not concern about ourselves, because what we are is that which is aware of this person as I. So we need to turn our attention back away from all phenomena, including the body, the mind, and everything, back towards that which is aware of these things. It is not an object. So attending to ourself is not like attending to an object. When people ask Bhagavan how to attend to myself, Bhagavan said, if the way were objective, it could be shown objectively. This is not an objective part. This is subjective. It cannot be shown by another. It cannot be expressed adequately in words. The words that Bhagavan has used are just pointers. So we need to think deeply about the words he's used and understand their implication and try to apply it in practice. The only way to learn how to investigate ourselves is to try. The more we try, the clearer the way will become. Because what are we attending to? When we're trying to turn our attention back to ourselves, we are the original light of awareness that illumines the mind, that in turn illumines the world. So we are turning our attention back to the original light of awareness, of pure awareness, I am. So by turning our mind back to that light, we are thereby purifying and clarifying the mind. So the practice becomes clearer and clearer the more we try.
Thank you, Mike.
Right.
Another question: what books would you advise for someone who really wants to understand Sri Ramana's teachings? Because there are so many books out there.
Yes.
What are really the essentials? If there was only one book to recommend to someone who wants to understand, or
the most important books are the most important texts are the few texts that Bhagavan has written himself. That is his own original writings. A very good one to start with is Nāṉ Ār, Who Am I? That is, we all read that at first and we understand something from it, but that is an extremely deep text. I have been studying that for 45 years or more now, and I'm still learning from it. Not that I'm getting more, I almost know the whole thing by heart. I'm not getting more information from it, but as we follow the path deep, more and more, the depth and clarity of the meaning there, the depth of meaning there becomes more and more clear to us. So that is one of the most important works. Two other very, very important works are Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, the 40 verses on what is, and Upadeshundya, the 30 verses. These are the three texts in which Bhagavan has expressed the core principles of his teachings in the most coherent and systematic way. So these are very, very important. However, there's a problem. There are many, many translations, and very few of them are satisfactory. That is, often these are very deep and subtle texts, and often the translators didn't understand clearly what was implied. And many translators have tried to add their own interpretation. For example, about Who Am I, Nāṉ Ār, there are various versions in question and answer form, but the main version is the essay form, because Bhagavan himself wrote that essay. He rewrote the questions and answers in the form of an essay, and he refined it, and he removed certain ideas that could give room for confusion or ambiguity. So the principal version is that essay version. But for many years, the only translation of the essay version was a very, very free one, free and interpretive. So, for example, when Bhagavan said in the third paragraph, just as unless awareness of the imaginary snake goes, awareness of the rope will not arise, unless perception of the world ceases, seeing one's own real nature will not arise. In that translation, whereas Bhagavan just talks about perception of the world, Jagat Drishti, it is interpreted there as perception of the world as a seemingly as an apparent objective reality. By adding that, it completely dilutes the meaning. The simple Bhagavan says, so long as you perceive the world, you don't see yourself. Because who is it who sees the world? We see the world only when we rise as ego. So it's only in the view of ego that the world seems to exist. So long as we're perceiving the world, we are not aware of ourselves as we actually are. We are aware of ourselves as I am this person. So according to Bhagavan, until the perception of the world ceases, we cannot know what we actually are. When we know what we actually are, ego will thereby be dissolved, and everything that existed in the awareness of ego will dissolve along with it. So this is one of the problems, that is the most important texts are Bhagavan's original works, but most of the translations of them are not entirely satisfactory, to say the least, and some of them are very unsatisfactory. I have translated most of the original works of Bhagavan. These three works, they're available on my website, on my blog, but I haven't yet printed them as books. I mean, it will happen sometime, but I'm so busy with so many things, I don't have time to do these things. But since most of us nowadays have access to the internet, if anyone wants to read these three texts, they are available. If you go to my website, on the sidebar, they're mentioned there. Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu and Upadeshundya, the 40 verses and 30 verses, they're on my blog, but the link is there from my website to my blog. Those are the most important texts. There are some other smaller works that Bhagavan wrote, such as Atma-vichara, that is the Song on the Science of Self, and Ekatma Panchakam. Those are also important works, but they're relatively small work. They're less important than these other three. And also some of the verses of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu Anubandham, the supplement to the 40 verses, that's a mixed bag, because some of them are verses that Bhagavan translated in various different contexts from other languages. Some of them are his own original verses. So some of the verses there are very important ones. Another very important set of works is Arunachala Stuti Panchakam, because this is a path of the heart. This is a path of love. And when we are trying to turn within and to surrender ourselves, we are up against a seemingly powerful enemy, our own mind. So we all face difficulties turning within. That is, we have strong inclination to go outwards, and so we lack. In order to turn within and surrender ourselves completely, we need all-consuming love. In order to cultivate that all-consuming love, we need to practice this path persistently. But the connection between this path and love, that is, there's so many very, very useful practical clues that Bhagavan gives us in Aruṇācala Stuti Panchakam, in the form of prayers and in the form of praise, but full of his teachings. So Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu ends with Bhagavan saying, annihilation, what is mukti? Only annihilation of ego is mukti. Where Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu ends, Aruṇācala Akṣaramaṇamālai, the 108 verses begins. Bhagavan says, Aruṇācala, you root out the egos of those who meditate on you in the heart as I. So they're complementary. What Bhagavan has sung in Aruṇācala Stuti Panchakam and what he sung in works like Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu Pradesh Undhya are complementary. We cannot understand either fully without understanding the other. That is, they're the two sides of his teaching. They're equally important. To get a full understanding of Bhagavan's teachings, we need to understand both.
Thank you. Thank you. And another question also, as a devotee, do I have to go to Ramana Ashram or Aruṇācala to experience the message of Sri Ramana, or can I experience it from anywhere?
You can experience you can experience it from anywhere, because Aruṇācala Ramana is that which is always shining in your heart as I. So we are always in the presence of Aruṇācala. We are always in the presence of Bhagavan. We cannot go to Tiruvannāmalai unless it's in our destiny to do so. We may like to go. If it's our destiny, it will happen. If it's not our destiny, it will not happen. If it's our destiny, it is certainly very nice to go. It is beneficial. There is something very special about that place. I mean, Bhagavan had such love. Though Bhagavan said Aruṇācala is that which is shining in the heart as I, he also said it is manifest outwardly in the form of a hill. So Bhagavan had so much love for that hill. And that's a place where Bhagavan lived for 54 years. So if we have the opportunity to go there, it is very good. I have the good fortune of living there for 20 years, and I was thinking I was going to spend my whole life there, but Bhagavan had other plans. So all these are ultimately, it's according to prarabdha. Whatever he ordains, that will happen. But if we go, it is good. If it's not our destiny to go there, doesn't matter, because mere thought of Aruṇācala is enough to give liberation. Why? Because what does thought of Aruṇācala mean? Aruṇācala is that which is shining in our heart as I. Turning our attention within to attend to I, that is the true thought of Aruṇācala, and that is the means to liberation. So it is not necessary, but if Bhagavan considers it beneficial, he'll enable us to go there, to be there. So whatever happens in our life is what is most beneficial, most conducive to our spiritual progress, our spiritual development. So whatever happens, it is his will and it is what is good for us.
Thank you. A question which has been asked by another follower is all about formalized religion. We see Brahmins doing Vedic rites in the Ramana Ashram.
Yes.
And has it been always the case? And what was the position of Sri Ramana about that? Because he was not fully liberated and so on. He didn't need any pujas or yagnas or anything like this. So what do you think?
When he was living on the hill, at the time of Deepawali, children from the town used to come up to Virupaksha cave with their fireworks. They wanted to play fireworks with Bhagavan. He played fireworks with them. Are we to say that is of any great spiritual significance? It's not. Bhagavan treats everyone at their own level. So there were people around Bhagavan who were much interested in Vedic rituals. If they wanted to do Vedic rituals, Bhagavan is least concerned. So these things have, all these rituals, they have nothing to do with Bhagavan. Bhagavan's path is a path of turning within. And the only physical worship Bhagavan did was walking around the hill. That is truly, if we wanted to do some physical worship that is in tune with Bhagavan, with what Bhagavan himself actually did, going around the hill is best. Walking around Aruṇācala, that is, it's a very special thing. But all these rituals going on in the temple, it's fine. Let those people for whom those sort of things appeal, it's fine for them. But Bhagavan never forced anyone to. That is different. Bhagavan, when Bhagavan was asked what teaching Yogananda, the Swami who went to America in the 1920s and 30s and started some self-realization fellowship, he visited Bhagavan in the 1930s. He asked Bhagavan what spiritual teachings are to be given for the uplift of the masses. Bhagavan said, no spiritual teachings can be given en masse. Teachings have to be appropriate to the level of one who is being taught. So different teachings are appropriate to different people at different levels. So Bhagavan allowed all these things to happen. But we shouldn't think, oh, because this is happening in Ramanashram, therefore Bhagavan recommended all these things. It need not concern us. That is, what is Bhagavan's central teaching? It is self-investigation and self-surrender. If we follow that, that is the path shown by Bhagavan. Bhagavan didn't come to ask us to do Vedic rituals or pujas or any of these things.
Thank you, Michael. Another question, which was all about what's the difference between deep sleep and samadhi? What's the difference?
Okay.
What's the key there?
The term samadhi, there's no one definition of the term samadhi. In fact, various texts classify different types of samadhi. Savikalpa samadhi, which means samadhi in which you're aware, of thoughts, vikalpas. Nivikalpa is devoid of thoughts or devoid of any differences. And then there's bahir, internal and external. There's so many different classifications. Samadhi itself is a yogic concept. Because in ancient India, there were many, many different systems of philosophy and practices according to each system of philosophy. And there was interaction between them. So if someone comes to argue against your philosophy and you want to convince them, you have to reply in terms that they will understand. So in that way, the term samadhi came to be used in Advaita text, but it is not native to Advaita text. It is a term that originates from yoga. What is generally considered as the highest samadhi is what is called Kevala Nivikalpa Samadhi. That is a state of, as Bhagavan said, it's a state of manolaya. It's a state like sleep. Actually, there is no difference between Nivikalpa Samadhi and sleep in the actual experience, because in manolaya, there is no, manolaya means a temporary dissolution of mind. All differences exist only in the view of the mind. So in the absence of the mind, there can be no differences. There can't be different types of states of manolaya. There's only one manolaya. The difference lies in how you go into that state. Sleep, how do we go to sleep? Because we're too tired to continue projecting this world. So eventually we subside into sleep. So we go to sleep through tiredness. If you undergo an operation, they may give you general anesthesia. Then you go into manolaya under the effect of that anesthetic drug. We may have a road accident or something and receive head injuries and be in coma. the cause of our manolaya is then due to head injuries. In yoga, they bring about that state of manolaya by means of pranayama and other such practices. That is the only difference, is how it's brought about, but they're all states of manolaya, and states of manolaya are only temporary. The mind is dissolved, but sooner or later it will rise again because it hasn't been destroyed. Yogis will tell you, if you ask this question to yogis, what's the difference between sleep and nirvikalpa samadhi? They will say, sleep is a state of darkness. There's no awareness in sleep. Whereas nirvikalpa samadhi is a state of light. It's a state of awareness. Bhagavan explained that difference. That is how it appears from the perspective of the yogi, because the yogi goes into nirvikalpa samadhi with deliberate effort. So it seems that they're able to recognize the awareness that remains there, whereas in sleep they don't recognize the awareness that remains there. According to Bhagavan, sleep is a state of pure awareness. So it's a state of pure light. It's only from the perspective of the waking mind that it seems to be a state of darkness. So actually there's no difference. Another important thing is, however long you sleep, you don't thereby make any spiritual progress. You don't, your vasanas are not weakened to even the slightest extent, however long you sleep. Even if you're in coma for 10 years, when you wake up, you're still the same person. Exactly the same with nirvikalpa samadhi. To illustrate this, Bhagavan often used to tell a story about a yogi on the banks of the Ganga. He had been practicing pranayama and other yogic techniques and had become very adept in them. So he was able to go into into nirvikalpa samadhi. And because he spent a lot of time absorbed in nirvikalpa samadhi, people took him to be a great sage. So a disciple came and was serving him faithfully. And one day when that yogi had been for some time in nirvikalpa samadhi, he woke up and he was feeling thirsty. So he asked his disciple to bring water. So the Ganga is just nearby. So the disciple took a cup and went to the river to bring water. But by the time he returned, the yogi had gone back into nirvikalpa samadhi. And that time he was so deeply absorbed in nirvikalpa samadhi, he stayed in that state for 300 years. So of course, the disciple had passed away. The river Ganga had changed its course over those 300 years. The village was there, a jungle had grown up, and some other village was somewhere else. People had completely forgotten about him, lost in this jungle. When he woke up from his nirvikalpa samadhi, the first thing he said was, he asked angrily, "Where's my water?" So Bhagavan said, even the most superficial thought, but was the last thought that was in his mind when he went into nirvikalpa samadhi, was the first thought that popped up. That means even the most superficial thought is not removed. What about all the seeds that give rise to thoughts, all the vasanas? They remain exactly the same. So that's why Bhagavan said he discouraged people trying to go into nirvikalpa samadhi. He said it's just a state of manolaya. It's not going to be of any use. If you want to follow the practices such as pranayama and other yogic techniques to calm the mind to a certain extent, but before it goes to the extent of subsiding in laya, then you have to turn it within to attend to yourself. But Bhagavan, it's not necessary for us to do any of these yogic practices, because what the yogic practices are intended to calm the mind down. But what is the most effective means to calm the mind down is to be self-attentive. Attending to ourselves is bringing about the subsidence of ego, which is the root of all mental activity. That all mental activity is thinking. Who is the thinker? It is ego. So attending to ourselves is bringing about a subsidence of ego, and therefore a subsidence of all mental activity. That doesn't mean that people think, therefore when I practice self-investigation, I should try to be without thoughts. I should try to be in a very calm state. That is not self-investigation. Merely the cessation of or the reduction in the mental activity is not self-investigation. In sleep, the mind is all activity of mind stops completely, but we don't make any spiritual progress. Self-investigation is not mere quietness of mind, as many people seem to think it is. Self-investigation means attending to ourselves. When we attend to ourselves, ego is unwilling to let go. So when we attend to ourselves, vasanas will be constantly rising. Vasanas means that the term Bhagavan used is Vishaya Vasana. Vasana means an inclination. Vishaya means an object or phenomena. In other words, anything other than ourselves. All thoughts and phenomena, all are Vishayas. So our inclination to attend to anything other than ourselves is called a Vishaya Vasana. Because we're not yet willing to surrender ourselves, when we try to hold on to self-attentiveness, the ego will be subsiding, so its inclination to hold on to other things will be rising. So Vishaya Vasanas will be constantly rising when we're trying to hold on to self-attentiveness. If we hold firmly to self-attentiveness, we are thereby destroying them as and when they rise. But generally, we can't hold on to that self-attentiveness deeply for long. We again are swayed by our inclinations, and our attention goes away from ourselves. And then we try and bring it back again. So people say, I meditated for 20 minutes, I didn't have any thoughts. That is not self-investigation. Even the idea they didn't have any thought shows how little they've understood about the nature of the mind. The ego, but who was it who meditated for 20 minutes without any thought? It was ego. Ego is itself a thought. Whatever is experienced by ego is thought. So even that 20 minutes without thought, what they mean by without thought is without mental chatter, without the verbal thinking. You may be able to reduce the verbal thinking, but the time is a thought. The I who is meditating is a thought. Everything that we experience is a thought, except the fundamental awareness I am. That alone is not a thought. That alone is real. So self-investigation means attending only to I am. Let us not worry whether the mind is active or inactive. If we are concerned about the activity of the mind, we are attending to something other than ourselves. We should be intent on attending only to ourselves. So whether the mind is agitated or calm doesn't matter. To whom is this agitation? To whom is this calmness? We need to turn our attention back to ourselves and hold firmly to self-attentiveness. That is the way to destroy vasanas. That is why vasanas can't be destroyed in sleep or in any other state of nirvikalpa samadhi, because ego is not present there. Because of the absence of ego, the vasanas are also absent, because they're ego's vasanas. There can't be any vasanas without ego.
Thank you so much, Michael. We're very, very grateful to you for the time you spent with us and for all the answers and insights you shared. I learned a lot.
Okay.
I thought I knew one or two things about Śrī Ramana, but clearly I have still a lot to understand.
There's not a lot to learn, actually. His teachings are extremely simple, but they're very, very deep.
Yeah, the learning, the teaching is simple, but the practice is something different.
But we can understand them only to the extent we put them into practice.
Yeah, exactly.
The deeper we go in the practice, the deeper and clearer our understanding will be.